Chapter 32. Too many dicks on the dance floor. Richard wasn't thinking. If he had been, he would have realized that while the red hats in the roundabout were the immediate threat, there were even more Second Amendment enthusiasts just outside the campus. They had been refused entry due to capacity, but once Nicholas Green essentially condoned the riot against Vector Defense on his livestream, the mob began pushing through the campus perimeter. If Richard had been thinking, he would have realized that despite Star Trek's best effort to convince people otherwise, the needs of the one do not, in fact, outweigh the needs of the many. If Richard had been thinking, he would have realized that even if he had a dick and balls, mutant monster cock or otherwise, the sheer number of rioting red hats was insurmountable. If Richard had been thinking, he would have realized that Justine was fucked, plain and simple. But Richard wasn't thinking. Instead, once Dorian King was inside, he slipped out the door and started running toward the green space and the mass of surging bodies surrounding Justine. He ran as hard as Kirk would have run to Spock, and in another second, the first few rioters ran past him, heading for the main entrance. Another clanking of metal. The doors locked and the shutters closed behind him, summarily locking them all outside. Fucking Lorraine. A shoulder slammed into Richard, and he jostled sideways as more and more people streamed around him. He felt like a trout swimming up a particularly violent, gun-wielding stream. The incoming rioters had split, diverting themselves around the hedges surrounding the green space and streaming through the roundabout to the front of the administration building. That left only the unlucky group that had followed Justine and Dorian into the center of the roundabout. Ahead, through the chaos and over the hedges, bodies started to fly, slamming into each other as red hats cried out in surprise. If Richard had been thinking, he would have heard horror and pain underneath the surprise. With one final push, Richard stepped over the curb, past the hedges, and into the green space, just as a wide spray of blood splattered across his face. Richard froze. The space in front of Vector's first missile was a scene of bloody carnage. Bodies were piled on top of each other, some breathing, most were not, and random limbs and gore were scattered across the grass. Standing in the middle of it all was Justine. Her back was to Richard, and her legs were spread wide, pulling her skirt taut. Sensing Richard's presence, Justine craned her neck, looking over her shoulder. Something twisted and flipped a body in front of her, and a familiar beast-like tentacle slithered back to Justine, disappearing underneath her skirt. Richard hadn't been thinking. And then, like it was Christmas fucking morning, his brain lit up with more thoughts than it could process. Neurons all but short-circuiting before a single thought could crystallize. Not only was Justine in possession of Richard's dick and balls, but she could also wield it with far greater control than he ever had. "You shouldn't have come out here!" Justine yelled as the rioters streamed and screamed beyond the hedges. She grabbed Richard's arm. "When they realize they can't get into the building, they're going to turn back this way." Richard stuttered, his brain still misfiring. With the whole, how did..." A harsh, grating sound filled the air, and they both turned to the missile. A 5-foot panel at the base had been pushed aside, and Chuck was leaning out from inside the missile. "Let's make like a DJ and drop the motherfucking beat, my guys!" Chuck hissed, waving them over. Richard and Justine exchanged a confused look. Richard pointed at Chuck. Is there a secret passageway underneath the missile? Did your boss put it there? Justine asked, needling Richard. Did yours? Richard responded. Chuck was getting impatient. Guys, let's go! Chuck climbed out from the base of the missile to let Justine slip in first. When Richard ducked into the missile, he found a narrow spiral staircase that led about 24 feet underground and into a wide, brightly lit concrete corridor. Chuck slipped into the missile and closed the hatch behind them. He spoke as he descended the staircase. We should be safe for the moment. Back in the day, Vector built this network of underground tunnels just in case something went south, like in R&D or something. Almost nobody knows about them, but the mailroom still uses them, especially when the weather's bad. Chuck took the final turn on the spiral staircase and stopped abruptly. Richard and Justine were facing each other, and that massive, anaconda-like monster cock had slithered out from under Justine's skirt, looping up into the air with its impossible, tensile strength. The cockhead was carefully hovering around Richard's face, reacquainting itself with its old friend. Okay, Chuck said. I have so many questions right now.